Peta, welcome to this presentation. When we spoke on the phone a few months ago, and Doug Mazinski introduced us, I was blown away by this topic because I thought this is something after my 20 years working in the outdoors, no one has ever talked to me about this. So I have no idea how to approach it. And I was also saying before we hit record and let you all in that we disagree on this, but I think Peter's job description of Director of Experiential Learning is the most boss badass title that there is. I think it's amazing because for the last few years I have just so geeked out on century-old ideas of experiential learning, and so I'm hooked. But with that, I'm really excited for this presentation, and thank you for joining us for Social Sciences Week. I'll monitor the chat, and if people have questions, we can go back and forth if you like. But thank you so much, and really excited for this.
Great. Thanks, Will. Thanks, everyone, for attending and being a part of this. I know it can be a really interesting topic to discuss. My name is Peta. I am the Director of Experiential Learning, but thank you for that job title introduction. I get a bit weird saying it, so it's nice to hear that it's quite boss. Out at St Michael's Grammar School, which is in St Kilda in Melbourne. So I think, Will, you were saying there was people logging in from all over the place, so welcome. As much as I like to claim that this is sort of the chat that we do, this is definitely not my chat. This is a chat that's kind of arisen from, I don't know, 15 years of being part of group leading in outdoor education. And every young person has contributed to this dialogue. Every teacher that I've had this conversation has contributed to this dialogue. And particularly every outdoor education staff member has really contributed to this dialogue. So as much as I put a presentation together and try and get this out to the world, this is definitely not just my knowledge or my story. It's definitely come from a lot of people and a lot of input. So thank you again for being here. I'm acknowledging that we are sitting, well, I am sitting on Wurundjeri country here in Melbourne, and I wanted to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of this country. I also want to particularly honour the role that women, and particularly Indigenous women, have had across all lands who have had nurtured a profound connection with Mother Earth, their understanding of her cycles and care for her resources, and strength in communities offer really invaluable lessons in living in harmony in our natural world. This one, I think I recently got asked about where did periods wild come from, and is it something that I have inherently wanted to talk about because I'm a woman? And I think it's actually really come from the fact that I have a 5-year-old daughter, and I really want her to be able to engage in these opportunities later in her life without any of the boundaries and barriers that do come with young girls and women, particularly having periods. And I think we've always had this narrative that women and girls can do anything, and that is the case. But I think what we're trying to do is flip that narrative around, comfort and accessibility and those sorts of things, because we know really truly that the data that we've sort of got is saying that girls are considering not attending these programs that we're running because of the potential of them having a period. So we know that they can do it. But I also had a really interesting conversation with a PA at work recently, and she said, and I only want to frame this because I think it's a really important narrative, and I think we forget this, that she went on a year 8 camp when she was younger, and it was a surf camp. And she now, as a grown woman in her 30s, hates going to the beach. And I said, oh, that's really interesting, but why is that? And she said it was because of her year 8 camp. And I like to share this, and she'll hate that I share this story so frequently. But she had her period, and she hadn't had it for a very long time. And we'll talk about that in a little while. And she went on a surf trip. And if you've ever gone on a surf trip before or been a part of a surf program, you'll know that quite often they are communal changing areas, and they're communal changing setups. And so we give these young people a wetsuit. We tell them to go into these communal bathrooms that are very well set up with long benches. But she didn't know how to manage her period in the outdoors. And so when she was handed a wetsuit, and she wasn't fond of using tampons, and we'll go through different products a little bit later, but she didn't like using tampons because they're quite intimidating, particularly for young people if they're not so sure. So she was using a pad, and she didn't know where to put the pad when she was getting into a bathing suit. Now, technology has come a long way. We've got some great products like period bathing suits and, all the things that do make this a little bit easier. However, she then went surfing with a pad in, and you can imagine that it fills with water and it's not very comfortable and it's very embarrassing. But then when she got out of the water, she was then put back into that situation where she was in a communal changing area and not sure how to manage her products, not sure how to manage getting changed. And then we as staff who are under these really important time constraints to get the program moving were really hustling her to get a wetsuit off. And if anyone's taken a wetsuit off, you know that that's hard anyway on a good day. But then to be trying to manage privacy and trying to manage a pad and trying to manage all of these things, she found it really challenging, and it actually put her off going to the beach. She hates going to the beach now as a grown-up because she just remembers that experience as a young person and how that's really embedded in her and her participation and engagement with the outdoors, which I think is a real shame. So hopefully as we move through this presentation, this sort of brings to light a few bits and pieces. And I've got to say, we are not academic researchers. I think we feel a little bit like imposters, but the research that we have done and the data that I'm going to show you has come from our young people on camps. I work in a school, I've worked in many schools, so the data has really come from the ground level of our young participants on the programs and from our teaching staff particularly. Get my face off the screen there with my daughter. Inclusive practices and a bit of understanding. So this is a bit of a longer version of the presentation than what we've done at other conferences, the Victorian Outdoor Education Conference and things. This is a bit longer, which is great because there's a few areas that we probably don't touch on enough. And one of the areas is definitely that area of inclusivity for non-binary and trans students. There is a bit of a QR code on the screen. There is a lot of research in this area. We don't yet present on it. I don't have my own data on it, so I don't present on other people's data or anything like that. So this is definitely going to be a presentation aimed at women and girls particularly. However, there's obviously a whole other level and layer of complexity when we look at non-binary and trans students in our school spaces, but I guess in general in participation spaces. Now, the big one that I like to start off with is an age conversation. So we look at what age do our experiences start, and that to me comes down to what sort of age group do we, really start putting them on school camps, and understanding when periods start. This is something that we probably remember doing in sex ed or health classes back in the day, but it hasn't been spoken about for a long time, and not to pinpoint any one particular demographic of, people that engage in this presentation. But I've had a lot of younger men particularly come up after the presentation and go, I have not heard this since I did it in like one PE class back in year 8. So these are sort of understandings of when periods generally start. Grade 4, age 9 is very young. But it can. And then we move up to sort of first period starting at about age 15, which is a little bit older on the scale. Generally speaking, though, you're looking at that year 7 to 8. And if I think about the program design that we've had for year 7s, particularly, with our camp provider in the past, it has not always been a really functional program for young people who might be starting their period. So I think just understanding complexities of camps and understanding complexities of the programs that we're running, and then the age gauge of when people are starting to first have their period is a really important narrative to sort of set the scene. I forgot that I put little things on my presentation that make it flash, but here we go. So some of the stats that we did, and this is research that we did on sort of a traditional outdoor education experience. So they were hiking, they were tent camping, and they were canoeing. Some of these programs also had mountain biking just as a flag, which mountain biking could be unpacked in its own probably its own session in terms of what it can bring and the kind of anxieties around mountain bike riding. But what we did is we did some research before programs, after programs on a range of different age groups, so year 7 to 10, on questions that we asked about participation on camp. If you knew you were going to get your period on camp, would you consider not attending? And if you knew there were no toilet facilities or only drop toilet facilities, would this influence your decision to attend? And do you feel comfortable as a young person discussing period related concerns with camp staff or teaching staff? And I think some of this won't come as a shock to you, and then some of it hopefully will unpack as a bit of a rationale as to why it's an important point. Do you feel comfortable discussing period related concerns? I actually thought we'd get a heavier percentage of no in this, but it's still not a great percentage, but I think it's a better percentage than what we were expecting. If you knew there were no toilet facilities or only drop toilet facilities, would this influence your decision not to attend? Over half of our participants said yes. And I think this is a big one, and we'll go through this again a little bit later. This is a big part of this narrative, I think, for some young people, is the access to toilet facilities and the access to some dignity when changing period products. If you knew you were going to get your period on camp, would you consider not attending? And 72% of our students said yes. That doesn't mean they don't come, but it's a consideration that in the back of their mind, they have this kind of level of understanding of the complexity. If they were going to get their period on camp, how much harder their camp experience was potentially going to be. 8% maybe, that's still, taking our percentage quite high of kids that would consider not attending. And then 10% said, nah, I would go. So that's a good 10%. We want that percentage to be higher. If managing your period was a key factor in deciding whether to attend or camp or not, what specific changes or supports would encourage you to go? And this is stuff we've quoted a few students, but this is sort of stuff and very collective narratives that we've pulled together from their responses. 88% of students said knowing I had access to a shower. And when we unpacked that with some of the students, we asked them questions and got a bit more information. They actually said they didn't need a shower at every camp. They just wanted to know that if they needed it, that they would have access to the shower if, it came to that. Toilets with doors. I think many people would understand that. And I guess some of the students we interviewed after this, they were younger. So this is where we're getting those first periods and understanding their nervousness around camp programs. But toilets with doors really came down to one fundamental, sort of narrative around dignity. And I think that's a really important word when we talk about this topic. Female staff to talk to, 94%. And I know that a lot of schools and organisations try and have, one female and one male staff member, but there have been definitely times where we've had camp programs where, it's been two male staff and maybe one female who's floating. I think that's probably the bare minimum. When we see these sorts of stats and female staff to talk to, 94% of students made that recommendation and said that that would help them go on camp. I think we need to prioritise and reprioritise that importance of having a female in every group. That's not to say, and this is the part of the Periods of Wild chat that we want to empower, is having really strong male advocates, speaking really truly to this topic as well to support their female students. But it is a very female dominated topic for obvious reasons. And so the young girls have identified that speaking to a female staff member is really important to them. Knowing how and where to dispose of my products. And this is, again, a huge one. And again, something that we'll talk to a little bit later. But knowing how to dispose of products is really important, but also where. I think there's been a lot of times where, particularly on camps, young people have disposed of products down a drop toilet. And we know that that's not appropriate. But my question to group leaders and staff is, where is your bin then? And it is a really important narrative because I've seen many groups and they've always got their bin near their kitchen set up, or, they're cooking with their groups and their group leading staff, and they've always got a bin really accessible to the group, but never anything near the toilet. And then we're shocked that a young person doesn't kind of want to take used products and put them in a bin in front of everyone, that they're sort of sitting around a camp kitchen or a campfire, So we'll talk again about disposal a little bit later, but a big one for them to know. Somewhere private to change, that's pretty given. Time to change, and we'll talk about that as a program perspective a little bit later at 67%. And can I call my mum if I'm unsure? Notoriously, camps have been really hardcore on no phone calls home, and, it builds resilience if you don't speak to home and all of those sorts of narratives. And so many of our young people just said, "Can I just call my mum if I get my period?" And I think that's a very reasonable adaptation to our program design that we could realistically put forward for young people in this space. Do you feel comfortable discussing period related concerns with your camp staff or teachers? And what could be done to make those conversations easier for you? Talking about it at school before camp. That's a given, that's an obvious one. And we have really tried to embed that with our young people before camps now. But it's definitely something that we are learning as well. We haven't always been good at this practice, but we are getting better at that. My mum knowing the answers, the amount of young people that just said they wanted their mum to know the answers. So we've developed some documentation that we send home, and we really articulate what the period process will be on camp for our students. Group leaders doing a really good briefing on camp. And I really wanted to hone in on this one because I think sometimes we get a little bit scared of doing period chat, and period chat just comes with toilet chat. You know, it doesn't have to be this really challenging or taboo topic. But group leaders doing a really good briefing on camp came up because a lot of young people said that if they had a male group leader, that they would then tell the teacher to go and do the period chat with their students. And my issue with that is that a teacher is sometimes, and this is no disrespect to teachers, but in the outdoor scene, sometimes they're a different sort of kind of participant, but they're more a participant than a leader in that essence of practice and policy and engagement. You know, our group leaders have all that information. And so the group leaders really, we would hope that either they're doing a really good briefing with a teacher before they go and do period chat, or they're running the period chat alongside a teacher rather than giving them the off you go and please go and talk to the females of your group. Something in the packing list with products and facilities I'll have access to. The facilities and access piece is a completely different part. But the packing list, if you have a think about the packing list that you've received for camp, or maybe you've got kids, or maybe you send packing lists, I promise you 9 times out of 10, it just says menstrual products or period products. It doesn't actually unpack what sort of things that they might want to have, like baby wipes or, you know, hand sanitizer, those sorts of things. It'll literally just say menstrual products, and then the quantity will be enough. Now, a young person sitting there like, well, I don't know what is enough. And also preparing them for the fact that, you know, cold can change your menstrual cycles, and stress can change your menstrual cycles, and all these things can change your cycles. So to make sure that they've actually brought enough product with them just in case they get their period, irrespective of what date they think they're going to get it. And something I can watch before I go came up, and we are working on that. So keep your eye out for that. I might share it with Will and the team and try and put it out into the, you know, the stratosphere of everything. But our school is really supportive of this work. And so we're going to work together to create some videos that we can send out to everyone to utilize for camp period chats, so that you can add that to your packing lists or your parent letters or your comms out to your participants at any point. And I liked code word on Year 9. So on Year 9 camp, we had something called code word. I'll unpack that in a little bit. Now, we're only going to touch on these very quickly, but some of the things that are particularly impacting our young people, but also our older participants, are these next 3 slides. So endometriosis, if you haven't heard about, I know it's getting a lot more attention these days, which is great, but it is still not probably getting enough considering how many women are actually suffering for it and how badly they suffer from it. So endometriosis is basically a disease where sort of tissue grows on the lining of the uterus and outside of the uterus, or similar to the lining of the uterus, grows outside of the uterus. And it really just causes this severe pain in the pelvis, and it can actually spread to other areas of the body as well. And it does mean all of the things that are sort of identified here on the screen. But when you think about particularly like where a pack sits on a young person or a young woman, and again, probably we're looking at those teach ages, the group leading ages, these are the stuff that we're talking about. But we're talking about the people who are carrying the most equipment, particularly in their waist and on their hips and in areas that this can really be effective. And we're asking them to turn up to work and do a really good job while they're managing this pain, you know. And I think this is just something to identify along with pregnancy. You know, I've been on so many camps, and particularly residential camps, and it's probably just food for thought when you've got people on your program who are of a pregnancy age or a typical sort of pregnancy age. we are so good at getting staff, particularly, to participate in our activities. And you think of high ropes and where harnesses sit, and we are so good at getting them to, um, put the harness on, and we peer pressure them a little bit to get involved in these activities, particularly on camps with younger participants like our primary schools. I think it's just a thing to be really conscious of and aware of, that pregnancy can be impactful for young people and for your teachers and staff that are on the program. And then menopause. This is something we don't talk about at all. And I'm not yet experiencing these premenopause or menopause or postmenopause sort of phases. And um, I do, however, work with a lot of staff that are in this age group and do experience these things. And then we put them out on a camp and we give them 15, year 10 kids. And then we ask them, to take care of them. But they're really experiencing some quite hectic sort of emotional changes and hormonal changes. And I think, again, we wanted to just identify this as an area of not concern, but I think of thought. We talk about dignity in the process for young people, but there's a dignity for our teaching staff as well that we really need to consider and do more research and do more conversations about. Now, first aid, products, medication, I won't go into too much detail in terms of the products, but we do share these slides so that you can use them to share with your schools or organisations as well, if that came up. But menstrual products particularly, pads as a refresher, disposal challenges, but easy to use. A lot of young people use pads because they're more comfortable for them, less invasive. It's great for young people on camp, particularly around squatwees and keeping underwear really clean and those sorts of things. And there is a difference, and this question comes up all the time, and I love the question. I'm really open to the question, but so many people said that they didn't understand that there were different sizes of pads and tampons and different menstrual products. There are things like overnight pads, which come right up the back of where your bum is. So when you're laying down and, gravity is kind of working in a different way for your menstrual cycle or the period to come out, the overnight pad actually covers a lot more of the underwear that the student or the participant is wearing. Daytime pads, a bit smaller, and liners are definitely not necessarily for a period. They're just there to sort of catch anything that might come out between periods, and that's a whole different other topic. But pads, as we've said with our friend's example at the start, pads are not great for water activities. They fill up with, the product, but they also fill up with water. So they're not a great one for water activities like rafting or surfing. Reusable cloth pads, that's a very personal choice on what you'd prefer to use. Obviously, the main thing here is a disposal challenge or a hygiene challenge in terms of carrying them out. Less invasive, again, great for squatwees, but you can see there that there are sort of washable and reusable products there. This is where I think we're going, and this is a great place to be going. Reusable undies, period undies, period bathing suits, that sort of thing is a great alternative option. Easy to use, but again, once they've been used, they do need to be carried out or packed appropriately because obviously they need to be washed. Great for lighter days of your period. And yeah, I think in discussions we've had, there's a lot more young people that are moving down this sort of way. And they're also becoming a little bit more cost effective, which is great. When they first came onto the market, and this is the other thing about periods, is it's a very expensive I was going to say hobby, but it's not a hobby at all. It's, it's just become a very expensive thing to be managing. So tampons, made from cotton, easy to remove. However, there is a bit of a hygiene thing here when you think about where the tampon has to go, particularly in environments where hand washing and hand hygiene can be a little bit lacking, I guess, for use of a better, for a better term. They do need to be changed regularly. They're good, great for water-based options, much better than a pad. There are different sizes available. So depending on the participant age, we always try to have a mixed bag of tampons available for students. So lots of different packets, lots of different colors. And then students can pick and choose which ones they would like. And I think that's really important if you're, upgrading your first aid kit or getting a period pack together, that you have lots of different varieties of products and brands and types. Requires good hygiene, so that's where your wipes and things would come into it. But a very good option for most outdoor activities. Applicator tampons. So this is big in the US, particularly, not as big here in Australia, but they are available. A lot better. I guess if you're nervous about hygiene because you're not having to get your own hands sort of as high up, but they basically work where they push the tampon into the young person or into the woman's vagina. So it it just means that you don't have to go as high up into the vagina as you would normally. It does come with a greater amount of packaging though. So they all come with their pros and cons a little bit here. Menstrual cups, not as I haven't heard of a lot of young people that are using them, but you might definitely have staff that are using these on programs, teaching staff, group leading staff. A great alternative option as well. Can be a challenge to use for people unless they've practiced a bit. Great for activities. Again, not always preferred for younger students, but can be left in a little bit longer. So they do take a little bit of cleaning, but they can be left in a bit longer than some of those other products. Now, one area that we wanted to bring up was UTIs and also thrush, because we basically create the perfect ground for activities for this to happen. UTIs are urinary tract infection. I read these and I think about it because this is exactly what we do when we go on camp. We reduce the frequency of urination or opportunities to stop and wee because our programs aren't usually designed with great timings for breaks and rest time. We reduce this because we also see a lot of people going on camps and expending a lot of energy and doing these activities become really dehydrated. That can also cause and impact UTIs. So firstly, you've reduced the frequency of opportunities to go to the toilet, and then you're dehydrating your participants. And then we've got things like antibiotics can sort of set off a UTI and thrush. Sorry, antibiotics are used to treat it, but antibiotics also lead to a yeast infection or thrush. So you've kind of got this mecca of things that can kind of happen to people. And particularly, I guess I bring this up because of those longer expedition programs. We've got a lot of young people leaving actually Saturday and Sunday this week for their Cozy to Coast program. And this is an area that we actually instruct and teach about because they need to know that these sorts of urinations and frequencies and dehydration is actually going to potentially cause some of these issues for them. We also talk about keeping clean and how to wipe properly. And this is, something that we teach our young people or, mums teach their kids or, they get taught very young, but it's not something that we really talk about later on. But wiping front to back, if you wipe back to front and you've got, sort of waste out of your bum and you're pulling it forward to your vagina in that area, it's a very delicate and very sensitive area. So you don't want those things to be brought forward. You always want to be wiping from the vagina back to the bum, if that makes sense. Now, yeast infections and thrush, antibiotics, and antibacterial wipes. So we always promote to young people that they use particular wet wipes. So not there's so many wipes on the market, and this makes it tricky. Baby wipes are great, water wipes are great, Vagisil sort of are a brand made for this sort of topic. A weakened immune system, so people are starting to get sick, they can get thrush or a yeast infection, birth control pills. And I put this in here because you will sometimes find that young girls particularly will go on contraceptive birth control pills in the lead up to an expedition program to try and skip their period. And so that's fine. And we don't make any recommendations around that. That is for them and their doctors to make a decision around. We do talk about it. So if it is something that is going to impact their participation, we talk about it really early. But the use of birth control pills can actually trigger some of these other things as well. Sitting in wet clothing like a wetsuit for too long, yeast infections and thrush. Sitting in or sweating and sitting in cotton undies for a long time can also lead to this. So wearing merino undies and really cool, breathable materials can help. And we do talk to the young people in our programs about wearing things like liners and changing them regularly so that they're not sort of sitting in sweat and things for too long. This is always my favorite one because people don't realize this, but I won't go into too much detail. You can have a bit of a read there. But basically, hormone fluctuations and imbalances can cause either one scale or another. They basically go from being really constipated to almost having diarrhea and nausea. So this isn't a really severe sort of case. However, it's something to consider, particularly when doing your first aid assessments. And we talk very quickly through um, doing a full patient assessment when we do wilderness first aid and those sorts of things. But we really don't talk about asking these questions, and particularly around, is it your have you got your period? Do you think you're leading into your period? Is the constipation really related to your hormones in this circumstance? So we bring it up for you to have a bit of a read, but also to make sure that you've always got enough toilet paper with particularly girl heavy groups is really important. Now, medication and medical considerations. Again, cycle regulation or pills or the pill for contraception, we only recommend on medical advice. We often know sort of insight into that. That's definitely a person and their medical practitioner. But one thing we do ask is bringing scripts, particularly on long expedition programs for students that are prone to things like thrush or UTIs, or having that medication with them. So we've never had an issue with recommending a young person go to see their doctor or their GP to get a script for antibiotics if they were to get this on program. And we, usually leave it at base, or we have the script so that we can go and fill that script on behalf of a young person. But bringing those on an expedition program means that their participation can either continue really seamlessly, or they can be brought out, given the medication, have a day out, and then be put back into the program really quickly. So rather than trying to get them to a medical practitioner while you're on a Cozy to Coast, program, and then having days out of the program, we're now turning that around really quickly. We've introduced having thrush treatments and thrush relief, so probably more relief than treatment in all of our first aid kits. So that's available to young people if they need it. Pain relief obviously goes without saying across the board. And bringing additional medication for international travel. So across both having antibiotics and those sorts of things, additional pain relief if they needed it. Infections and stuff we know it can implicate kidneys and cause great amounts of discomfort. So making sure that you have those medications potentially before you go onto a program so that you've got them with you at all times. Programming and sort of disposal and things like that. I know we're going to start getting tight on time, but in terms of practice and disposal, we have, again, a letter and a document that outlines all of this, and I'm happy to share that with anyone that sort of would like that. But what we recommend to young people are the following 3 products. So we use biodegradable sort of nappy bags. Then we have a paper bag, and then we have a snap-lock bag. So the first one on the left there is a biodegradable nappy bag. They're unscented. They don't smell like baby nappy bags. If you've ever had experience with nappy bags, they smell fruity and they're lovely. You can use them if you want to. But the biodegradable bag, so what we tell our young people is to put their waste product into the biodegradable nappy bag. They then tie that up and put that into the brown paper bag. The brown paper bag is then safe from sort of having any leakage or anything from the product in the brown paper bag, which helps with that dignity and not walking around with a plastic bag of your own sort of used period products. And then we have a snap-lock bag, so we can pop that brown paper bag into the snap-lock bag so that we're making sure nothing smells and we're making sure everything's clean and dry and hygienic. The then snap-lock bag can be put into the bin. And another thing about sort of waste disposal is, obviously, I think young people get really nervous because we know that there's so many campgrounds that animals get into waste bins and stuff. This really stops that from smelling, but it also means that they can hold on to that until they find a proper bin or a toilet that they can dispose of their own products if they feel more comfortable doing that. And we're very comfortable with that being quite a safe and hygienic process for them on a shorter trip. Where is your camp bin? We've already discussed a little bit, but I think it's such an important topic about placing those in a place that you know is a really dignified place for someone to go and put their products. It is a hard one, even as a, mid-30s woman. I'm not walking across your campsite to put my products in a bin that's sitting around a campfire or near a dining table. And it's very easy to do because I know, and I've been a group leader and I know I've done this myself, is it's very easy to tie the bin, to a picnic table or something, so that when you're cooking, it's very easy to get rid of those food scraps. But just ensuring that you have another bin maybe at the drop toilet, or you have another bin somewhere for people to dispose of their products, is a really important factor here, to make sure you're not ending up with these products down a drop toilet or being flushed, down regular toilets either. Now, hygiene, this probably goes without saying in terms of washing hands and antibacterial wipes and having hand sanitizer for hygiene, and the importance of hygiene in this space. But one thing that we talk about as well is hygiene in program design. So it is not always practical to bring a young person out for a bath or a shower if they have an accident, and if they get blood on their clothes and those sorts of things. But it is very easy for us as group staff or program designers, or whatever role you sort of take in this space, to have enough equipment to be able to provide a young person with some hygienic cleaning facilities. So that is hot water, a nice big bucket, some face washers, and a tarp. We always have tarps on us so that students can stand on them, so that students can, feel like they've got a little bit of, I guess it's, I think some of our young people have described feeling really overwhelmed by the bush. And what I mean by that is there is nowhere they can go that isn't touching dirt or touching sticks or being touched by something. Or so what we do is we put out a really big tarp, we give them hot water, and they can set out all their things really big in a really private area. And that might still be in the bush, they might still be surrounded by the bush, but they've kind of got somewhere to escape from that and stand on. I think this is a big one. And this sort of kit lives in our vehicles, particularly on expeditions, so that if someone needed it, they could have the opportunity to clean themselves really hygienically and really properly. In terms of practice and program design, this is probably the area that, outside of the medical side of period management, is really important. And what I mean by that is, does your program design allow for breaks? I cannot tell you how many times I've gone rafting, and I really want to do the demonstration with like a full wetsuit on so that people understand. But when you pull off onto the river and you've got young people sitting in their wetsuit booties and their wetsuits, but under their wetsuit, they then have a layer of thermal, and then under that layer of thermal, they might have their underwear. If you consider what is actually being worn on top for rafting as an activity. So we'll go from the bottom. We'll start again. We've got underwear. And so a young person's wearing their period products under that. So whether it's a tampon or a pad and it needs to be changed, they've got their underwear. They then got thermal bottoms, right? And their thermal top to keep them warm. They then have potentially a wetsuit over the top of that. And then over the top of that, they're going to have a cag or maybe a rain jacket or something over the top to keep the wind and the rain sort of at bay. Then over the top of that, they've then got a PFD and potentially a helmet. So when you are stopping for maybe 10 minutes to have a quick muesli bar, and a young person really feels like they either need to wee because they're going to get a UTI, or they need to change their period product, I don't know how quickly you and I get out of a thermal and layers of wetsuit, but it takes longer than that. And people have asked for this, and young people in the data that we collected have said that they just want breaks that are long enough for them to actually do what they need to do. And that comes down to our program design. And we've talked a lot, particularly at the Outdoors Victoria conference, we talked a lot about that, slowing down the pace of activities and program design to allow for some of these breaks to happen, to make this a really accessible space. Is waste disposal available at all times? That's probably one that, again, with our practice of having the nappy bag and then the paper bag and then the snap-lock bag, that probably really supports this, because they'll have their own system for waste disposal. But it's an important one, and people get a bit weird about carrying their period products as well themselves. So probably worth having that conversation with people about. But program design, slowing down the pace of your program. And I know we got into a habit, and it probably became something that, because it was a good selling point for schools, but having a program activity in the morning and then rushing to a program activity in the afternoon and then having something as a night activity, there's just a lot. We're action packing these program designs, and I understand why, but maybe there's a consideration there to slow that down ever so slightly to offer some more opportunities for breaks in this space. Factors and camp selections, understanding, I think it's just really having a think about toilets and how far away toilets are. That's probably a no-brainer. We probably don't need to go into that too much, but having confidence in the decision making around campsite selection is probably all we wanted to raise in this space. And then camp factors. So there have been times where schools are going back to the same properties, or maybe they use an independent site. Is there some kind of infrastructure investment that can be made? And it's not necessarily putting in a flashing toilet facility, but maybe, a smaller semi-permanent or a smaller hut of some description that just offers that peace of mind and privacy. And as I said, again, dignity to our young people and our teachers that are going on these programs. Now, code words and period packs, we always carry period packs. So we use little pencil cases and we put some FemFresh wipes in, we put a little chocolate bar. Our team, not by any intentional method, but we're all female, so we write little notes and we put them into the packs of the girls that say, "Oh, I'm really sorry, like you're doing great, like keep going." But we always have these packs available to students so that they can come up and grab them at any time. There are no questions. They can use whatever they want out of them, and they either give us back the pencil case or they keep them and I don't know, use them for other things, or maybe make their own period packs. We don't really mind, but the investment in this space is minimal for how comfortable the girls feel coming to grab those period packs at any point during our programs. And code words was one that we had because, as we identified in the data earlier, there were girls that really didn't want to talk about this topic with their staff, and they felt uncomfortable talking about it. So code words was that we all created a code word before we went on camp, and they could use that as a no questions asked. We will come and support you with whatever you need. And so it would mean that someone from base would come out, or their teacher could then ask a couple of questions. Do you need a period pack or do you need base support? Code words, I've had very funny ones in the past. I've had very serious ones. Some students love using fruit for some reason. I don't know why, but that's okay. So peaches comes up a lot. But code words, and honestly, I reckon since we started using code words, I've had 3 students use that, and they genuinely needed the support. So we don't have students using it just to get out of program. We talk about it really strongly about why we use it and what it's used for and what it means if you do use that, and that we would come and help you, no questions asked. And that sort of gave some comfort to our young people. And then the letters and the videos, we've talked about the videos. This is not as comprehensive as what our letter has become now. But in terms of the packing list, we really unpack the packing list of, instead of just saying menstrual products, what is it that we're expecting you to bring? What is it we think you might like? The brown paper bags, the nappy bags for your products, and then how to go about managing your period in the bush. So we say, be prepared, set up your space, clean yourself first, and make sure your products are there ready to go. And we share this with all of our programs so that, parents can have a read through. They can answer questions if the students don't want to have a read, but at least it's there for them for all the programs that we run. Anyway, I think that kind of got us to the end. Are there any questions? They're probably...
Thank you so much, Peter. That was awesome. Graham was texting me and we were thinking about, and Doug, and we were all thinking, we should probably think about how we actually do this in our own work as well. Because I was just thinking of all the expeditions I went on and what I probably missed. And then I was really thinking about my time working in Alaska where we were all in dry suits, and then how much rushing and how much stuff we did there. So I really enjoyed that. Thank you so much. What I might do is stop the recording unless you have any other things that you wanted to add.
Not particularly.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, I will stop the recording and then we can have a discussion. Thank you so much, Peter. That was awesome.
No worries. Thanks, Phil.